Hi, I'm Mike Bellevue. I'm the black powder editor for Guns of the Old West magazine. And today we're going to be examining double action six guns of the Old West. When we think of six guns of the Old West, we typically think in terms of single actions. And even the more sophisticated among us who know there's more than just Colts out there, still think in terms of single actions, Remingtons, Schofields. But the 19th century was really the great age of invention. And double action design started even before cartridge guns were coming out. Remington had one. There were plenty of foreign guns that were double action entering the market. And American gun manufacturers knew that that was the wave of the future. And they got on it fairly early. This Colt was Colt's first double action. See, Colt Lightning or Thunderer, which are terms that Colt never used, but one of their distributors, Ketteridge in Ohio, did. The Lightning was the 38 long Colt model. The Thunderer was the 41 Colt. But for Colt, this was the model 1877 double action. In 1878, Colt came out with a much better design, much more robust. And that was the 1878, sometimes called the Colt Frontier double action, where the 1877 was a very, very delicate design, way too complicated, too many springs, too many small parts, and it gets out of timing very easily. In fact, we are not going to shoot this today because just putting it on half cock to load it knocked it out of timing. So we're just going to let it rest. This gun, much more robust. It was called the Omnipotent by Ketteridge, and we'll put some bullets through this. This was available in all the popular calibers that the Single Action Army was available in. And then their main competitor, Smith & Wesson, and this was their Frontier double action revolver. And this one's in 44-40, though most of them were in 44 Russian, which was Smith & Wesson's basically proprietary cartridge that preceded the 44 Special. But a few of these were made as the Frontier double action in 44-40, and this is one of them. The three guns that we're going to talk about today, the Colt 1877, the Colt 1878, and the Smith & Wesson Frontier double action, weren't the only double action revolvers on the Western frontier. Remington had an earlier cap and ball revolver and then cartridge conversion. There were plenty of foreign guns, and a little bit later in the period, there were American competitors like Merwin Hulbert. So there are other guns out there, but these guns, these three, are the iconic six guns of the Western frontier, and we'll take a look at them now. The 1877 that we have here today, and in fact the same one that you'll see in this picture, was provided for this test by Jay Harrell, who's also known by his SAS alias of Roughshod. Jay is one of my best friends, and he's got a very good collection. And he loaned us the two DAs on the Colt side for the test today. But what you're seeing in this picture is a detail of the cover of my only novel. And one of my characters in that novel, which is called The Lady Gay, used a Colt double action 1877 in 38 long Colt. So, you know, the 1877's got a place in my heart because of that, if for nothing else. Now, if we're talking 1877s and literary characters, there is one who is famous for his use of a Colt Thunderer, and that would be Tabor Evans' character, Marshal Custis Long, better known as Long Arm. And this is a series of adult westerns. If you've never read them, there are about 300 of them out there. They started in 1978, and of course the author Tabor Evans does not exist. And in fact, back in the 90s, my agent tried to talk me into doing one. I mean, a number of well-known authors have done them, and then guys like me. But I just didn't have the time to do it. But Long Arm used a Colt Thunderer, which would be the 41 caliber version of this gun. And in the series, he says that his gun was had the cylinder and barrel bored out to 44-40, which I'm here to tell you is an impossibility. This gun is very small, it's very delicate, and it could in no way fit the 44-40 cartridge. A real problem with this gun, it's beautiful, the most beautiful, I think, of the double action revolvers of the 19th century. But it has an incredibly complicated and delicate action, and these things break all the time. And the reason we're not going to shoot it in this test is because when I put it on half cock to load it, that was the end of it. I unloaded it, moved it to full cock to drop the hammer, and it never moved again. So we'll be going back to the shop, and mind you, this had just been tuned up by one of the premier Colt 1877 gunsmiths in the country before I got it to test from Jay. So these guns had problems. Most of them you find are not working, and if they're working when you find them, they won't be working about 10 minutes after you find them. But they sold an awful lot of these things. Between 1877 and 1909, Colt produced over 166,000 of these little double-action revolvers, which is a testimony to the fact that most guns are never shot. They are just put in the sock drawer in case they're ever needed. And if they are needed, with this thing, you're lucky if you get through a cylinder full. Now, there were a few famous people that used them. Tom Horn had one. John B. Jones, a Texas Ranger, used one in the gunfight with Sam Bass at Round Rock. And probably the two most famous people that had them were Billy the Kid and John Wesley Hardin, and those were folks who used their guns. So they must have got good ones, because I'll tell you, every one that I have ever used broke down in very short order. They're full of small, complicated parts, delicate springs. It's a tough gun to keep going. So we're going to move on to the Colt 1877, which was absolutely a better design. Colt manufactured the model 1878 between 1878 and 1905. And in that period, they made over 51,000 of them, which is a pretty substantial number, but still not even a third of the number of 1877s that they produced. So go figure, the gun that worked didn't sell as much. This gun, the 1878, was meant to be the double-action corollary to the Colt single-action Army. And as such, it was chambered in all of the popular calibers that the single-action Army was chambered in. And the cylinder of the double-action gun is exactly the same size as the cylinder of the single-action Army. And in fact, the barrel and ejector rod housing of the 1878 double-action are exactly the same as the single-action Armies. They interchange completely. And a lot of old single-action Armies have been brought back to life by pulling the barrels off of 1878 double actions. So that was fairly common. Now, our test gun is in .45 Colt. Now, most people think the 1878 Colt is less graceful than its 1877 counterpart. And to be honest with you, the looks kind of grow on you over time. But this was a much more effective handgun than the 1877. Colt's double-action revolvers, the 1877 and the 1878, they load essentially just like a Colt single-action revolver. They've got a loading gate, and you load them one at a time through the rear. And it's the same deal because we're only going to load 5. So we'll load 1, skip 1, and then load 4. And then we're good to go, and we're empty under the hammer and safe. The 1878 Colt actually has a pretty smooth double-action trigger pull, and it's not difficult to shoot fast and accurately on target. And the double actions unload just like a Colt as well. They've got an ejector rod underneath, and we'll just kick them out. Boom. Right, and that's the way we'll unload all 5. I would not want to be on the receiving end of this. Well, the last gun we'll look at is the Smith & Wesson double-action Frontier revolver, also known as the double-action new model number 3, the DA first model revolver. That has a lot of monikers. Smith & Wesson made this from 1881 to 1913, and they made almost 54,000 of them. And of that, 15,340 were in 4440, which mine is as well. It was known as the Frontier Double Action. These guns look very Victorian. They look very different to our eyes. But at the time, this was still as high-tech a fighting six gun as you're going to. When we look at the Smith & Wesson Frontier Double Action, it looks incredibly archaic today, and it's hard to believe that this is of the same lineage as, say, Dirty Harry's 44 Magnum, Model 29. But back in the 19th century, this was a cutting-edge fighting six gun. But just like the Colts, this was an evolutionary dead end, and by the end of the century, both Colt and Smith & Wesson had gone to the solid frame swing-out cylinder six guns that came to dominate most of the 20th century, and guns like this just went into the sock drawer. Alright, loading the Smith & Wesson is a whole different ball game from loading the Colt. This is a break top. You just open the entire action up and just load the bullets from the back. And if I wasn't balancing a camera here, this would be much faster to load, and of course much faster to unload than a Colt. I'll put that in the middle, and as you can see, we're safe. Always just load 5. The Smith & Wesson Double Action has a much harder trigger pull than the Colt, which makes it a lot harder to fire it fast in double action mode. And unloading a Smith & Wesson, a lot easier than unloading a Colt. Just pull a latch, right? Dump them, everything is out. Even though it's got a pretty heavy trigger pull, in a real gunfight you would never notice it. As a friend of mine said, you could crush a brick in your hand when that adrenaline gets going. So I'm sure this was an effective six gun.